Hello, hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about how exactly I wrote Tearing Down the Wall. This particular novel is my second novel that I published. It was published by Cloud Orchid Publishing, and the origins of this novel are actually pretty interesting. So let's get into it. Tearing Down the Wall was originally written all the way back in the before times. And back then, it actually started out as a fan fiction. A little bit of Dorkosaurus reveal here for y'all. I used to be a big part of the Hey Arnold fan community. So I contributed fan art and fan fiction. And here's the crazy thing, y'all, is during the time when I was separating from my ex-husband and while I was going through my divorce, I actually ended up becoming very good friends with the group. We all actually controlled the 100,000 signatures Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie group, which is now known as the We Did It Jungle Movie group. And the whole point of that group was trying to get the final Hey Arnold movie, the Jungle Movie, created. It was supposed to be created before Nickelodeon and Viacom pulled the plug on the Hey Arnold series. So the very last episode is called The Journal, and that was supposed to be the precursor to the Jungle Movie. That whole fandom became a big part of my life during that time period because I had really gotten away from my writing and my art during my modeling career from 2008 to about 2013. I officially retired from modeling in 2013, which was also around the same time that I went through my divorce. That's a whole other story, y'all. Not really about to get into that. That fandom became a huge part of my life, as did that particular group, and we were all the admins of that group, which meant we were in charge of it. And as such, that came with a lot of awesome privilege and all that kind of stuff. So it gave me a lot of joy. It gave me a feeling of power again in my life where previously I didn't have much. And most importantly, it sparked my creative juices and got me writing and drawing again, albeit it was fan art and fan fiction, still absolutely legit credible creative pursuits. So Tearing Down the Wall was originally a Hey Arnold fan fiction that I wrote, and it basically takes place in a college setting. And the idea was to have what if the original Hey Arnold characters, Helga and Arnold, suddenly realize they're going to the same college together and are finally able to realize their relationship. I also wrote this before the Jungle Movie came out. So a lot of the story elements were based on that fandom prior to a lot of those relationship arcs and story arcs coming to a close in the Jungle Movie. And there were a lot of speculative concepts that were dismantled due to the movie. So take that with a grain of salt if y'all are looking for some little Easter eggs and clues in that novel to that fandom. Take that timeline into consideration. I actually completed the entire novel as a fan fiction before it ever even crossed my mind to make this into a romance novel. The actual complete story was available for several years on fanfiction.net, and I had a massive following on there because the Hey Arnold community is huge and it is going strong even to this day, y'all, even though I'm not really active there anymore. But it was on there for a long time and people loved it. And I started to get back into writing and I started to get really into creating Cloud Orchid Publishing with my friend Brian Thompson. And with that, I really wanted to give my stories homes in terms of creating books. And some of that was revisiting that fan fiction because I really loved that story and I felt like it could be a real book. So basically the short of it, as I explain to people, is I effectively kind of scraped off the barcodes on that story, changed all the names so that you can't trace it back to the Hey Arnold fandom just by picking it up and reading through it unless you actively know this backstory, as well as because it takes place in a college setting. And I basically just used the Hey Arnold characters as kind of like my paper dolls, just like starting point characters that I could then mold and utilize the way that I wanted. And since it's an older setting, it has nothing to do with the original cartoon series because they're elementary school kids in the cartoon series. So there really isn't a whole lot that you can really point to being a part of the show and being in any danger of any sort of liability in terms of that. It was really more so just tweaking a few details here and there and changing names, and ta-da, it's a story. Of course, I didn't just do that, because that's a big mistake that a lot of people make when they want to take their fan fiction and convert it into a novel. Is you can't just change the names and then expect it to magically be a book. You really have to take it out of the fan fiction formatting and make it into actual novel formatting. And a big part of that is because a lot of times, especially on places like fanfiction.net, you put things piecemeal. You write a chapter, you publish that chapter, and then you keep writing in that fashion. And I did the same thing. So that meant that I had to go back and I had to edit the whole manuscript all the way through, because a lot of those chapters did run into some issues of continuity issues, as well as some of the cutoffs were a little bit jarring in terms of a book rather than just as a chapter up on fanfiction.net. So just going through and then making it sure that it was a cohesive book all the way through, not just all these random standalone chapters that I had just written and thrown out into the universe. So making sure that I went through that whole editing process was a huge part of being able to transform this fan fiction that I had written into being an actual romance novel. And a big part of why I had my friend Rebecca Story, aka Beckers, design the cover art for Tearing Down the Wall, as well as my other two romance novels, which also have basically the same origins, all three of them, is because she was one of the, as we called ourselves, the Evil Six. Whole other story with the fandom and all that, but that's what we called ourselves. And she was our main artist. She is incredibly talented. Oh my goodness, she has created so many beautiful works over the years. She has done so many amazing commissions. And so I wanted to commission her for these books as kind of a final nod to the fandom and a final thank you to that fantastic group that helped me get through that really dark space and really helped inspire me to write these stories. That being said, with growing as an author and with really wanting to do all that I can in order to best market my books and put my author career in the first and foremost of my interests, Brian and I are currently working on doing a redesign for the three current romance novels that we have published, in that I am going through and doing second edition edits, which is basically just a comb through of find any little typos or any little things that I missed, which no matter how much you edit a book, it's never going to be perfect. You're always going to find those little things that slip through the cracks. That's always a thing. And that's why a lot of authors will release multiple editions of their books and even offer giveaways for finding typos and things like that to help with that process. We are going to be doing a second edition with the fresh edits, as well as we are going to be doing cover redesigns for all three books to make them be a little bit more of that traditional romance novel cover vibe going on. So be sure to stay tuned for that second edition release. I'm really excited to share all of that with y'all. I'm currently in the thick of doing the edits for these three novels, along with my other 8 million projects that I'm working on. To get into the nitty gritty, what exactly inspired me to write Tearing Down the Wall in the first place, especially because this was the first story that I had written after a very long hiatus. So I graduated from Columbia College, Chicago in 2011, and that's when my modeling career was really taking off, and I kind of stopped writing after I graduated. And I got back into writing fan fiction around that time period. So, due to the hiatus of my modeling career, where I really wasn't working on my writing or my art because I was so busy focusing on my modeling career, I wasn't exactly going to jump in headfirst and be like, I'm going to write a novel. Kind of went in toe first, having fun with just low risk fan fiction and fan art. And Tearing Down the Wall in particular was inspired by another fan fiction writer in the community. I unfortunately can't remember her name, but I do remember that the story was called, I think it was called The Mask. Something about a mask. Basically, it's the same sort of idea where it's Helga and Arnold end up going to the same college together and realize their relationship. So I kind of jumped off that. That's why I chose that particular time period with college setting and all that. But Tearing Down the Wall is a very different story from The Mask. I would say that The Mask is definitely more fun and fluffy, whereas Tearing Down the Wall has some very emotional elements, including that as I changed the characters' names to Freya and Alex, Freya gets attacked while on campus, and Alex kind of has to deal with physical and emotional fallout of how to best support Freya in that, because it's all of the guilt and also just being put at arm's length because Freya is the kind of person who doesn't really like to be vulnerable, doesn't really like to let people in emotionally. And that's why it's called Tearing Down the Wall, is it's all about being vulnerable and tearing down your emotional walls and how she struggles with that. And Alex also finds that in certain aspects, he kind of struggles with that too. It's a very emotional story. It does have a happy ending because that is a big requirement of romance novels, is you got to have a happily ever after, or at least a happily for now ending, that sort of thing. It does have a happy ending, and there are a lot of really fun parts. I just had so much fun writing this story, and it really just gave me somewhere just to go with all of this other stuff that I had going on in my life at that time that was very stressful and very difficult. And I was able to kind of write through that with this story, just kind of get through a lot of things that I was going through at that time, things that had happened to me previously that I also kind of wanted to work through. There's a lot of my own personal experiences and emotional experiences that were put into this book, but I would not say by any means that this is any sort of autobiographical or me Mary suing the main character, anything like that. Freya definitely is her own person. Alex is definitely his own person. And the blend of character traits that I gave them in addition to their fanfiction origins, I think just makes for a really tremendous story. And one of the big reasons also why I tackled this particular genre is all throughout my college career, I had professors that kept pressuring me to write things that were real. And unfortunately, I felt that their idea of real was just very extreme. A lot of the things that they asked of me that they wanted me to write about, I just was not comfortable sharing. They wanted me to write a lot about my own personal experiences and just a lot of subject matter that I wasn't comfortable with, like drug use and being out on the streets, running away from home, living a hard knocks life and whatever. Like for some reason, like that was really romanticized during that time period at Columbia by some of the professors, and it made me incredibly uncomfortable because, first of all, I've never lived a lot of those experiences. Second of all, that sort of genre was not something I had any personal desire to write about, and especially since I had no experience with it, I felt like it was none of my business to write about. It just made me really uncomfortable. And on top of it, I've unfortunately had some personal experiences that are very traumatic in different ways than the examples that I gave. But I had no desire to share those in any sort of public setting, especially writing them for my whole class to see and read. I just wanted nothing to do with that. Through this starting as fan fiction and then becoming a romance novel, it enabled me to kind of explore some of that emotional vulnerability. As you can see, we got a theme going here in a safe way that I didn't have to reveal myself. I didn't have to feel like I was putting too much of myself out there with that safety net of fiction. And it just made me feel a lot more comfortable to be able to tackle a more real story instead of the traditional fantasy that I had been writing previous to that. I've also always been a huge fan of historical fiction and had written historical fiction stories previous to writing Tearing Down the Wall. I actually wrote Geisha Hands before I wrote Tearing Down the Wall, funny enough. Geisha Hands was actually written around the same time that I wrote Love of the Sea in college. Tearing Down the Wall didn't get written until several years after that. It's funny how you start writing things and then you work on other things and then they get published and just all the order of those things. It's a whole journey, y'all. But anyway, I digress. Yes, historical fiction novels are honestly very real, very true stories. However, they're about somebody else. They're about a different time period. They have nothing to do with you, really, unless, I mean, you want to Mary Sue that and make it about you. I mean, be my guest if that's your bag, no shade. But that was another way that I was able to avoid writing about myself or putting any sort of emotional vulnerability into my stories, was writing other people's stories, writing about other time period stories, or just writing completely fantastical stories. I had never really written anything real and personal, anything like that. These romance novels are honestly the closest thing that y'all will ever see me write something real in terms of a novel. I don't have any plans in the future of ever writing any sort of autobiography or anything like that. This doesn't interest me. Only other thing that comes close are some of the short stories that I share in some of the art books that we've published under Cloud Orchid Publishing. Especially Absent Ventriloquist. I think that one and Abandoned Bride are probably the only two where I actually do share excerpts from my personal journals. And even then, that's more in the context of a particular subject that I want to bring awareness to. With Abandoned Brides, it's divorce. And with Absent Ventriloquist, it's dealing with the fallout of being bullied. Those are more about a topic and not so much about me personally as a person. It's just using myself as an example for those topics. That is the closest that I really get to being physically me on the page rather than writing about a character or a situation or a time period, as I have that preference. And I will say that Tearing Down the Wall and my other current romance novels, Phrase Baby and Phrase Baby Shattered, technically don't follow the ultra-traditionalist romance novel formula. However, they do hit a lot of the merit marks that traditional romance does hit. And of course, one of the biggest things is that the main characters do become a romantic item and they get their happily ever after. Those are the big points that I always make sure that I hit with my romance novels, but I do like to be a little bit more conventional in how exactly they go about their journeys. And I'm going to be going in a much different direction with my next romance novel, Being Mine, which we're going to have completely different characters. We're not going to have Ray and Alex. New characters, new setting, completely new journey. So I hope y'all are prepared for that. I'm having a lot of fun with that. There will be more Freya and Alex stories in the near future. I'm just taking a little bit of a current break from them and their settings, but I will be bringing them back soon. So never fear, there will be more Alex and Freya to love in the future. But for now, I really hope that y'all will pick up Tearing Down the Wall and be sure to leave a review. Tell me all about what you think. I love hearing what y'all think. It is available on Amazon and ebook and paperback, and it is on my big never-ending to-do list that eventually I do want to create audiobooks of all of my novels in the future. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope it gives you more insight into my writing process, as well as what inspires some of these stories that I have created. Thank you all so much for watching, and take care and have a great day. Bye bye!